So the thing is, though, I mean, you got to think about this. Whatever I put out there, is this really possible? After all, if it can be envisioned, if it can be thought today, it can be done. Let's go back a little bit here. Okay, soda bottle, fine. You know, the universal remote, well, Apple remote works. I'm sure it's only a little bit of step from there to a universal remote. Projected screen is coming. You saw the circuit, right? So a lot of these things that are put down are on their way. Because if you can think about it, you can do it, right? So sky's the limit. I mean, these are two 3D printed hands. We don't realize this, you know, lucky ones, you know, that those who actually need the 3D printed hands, they're pretty expensive. So this is a new revolution that's happening in the medical industry where they can print these at home. Something happens, I can just print it. So here, let's look at a timeline of wearables. I mean, I'm going to kind of skip through it because I want to get to the code stuff and show you some of the interaction that's happening. But let's look at the timeline, brief timeline. I mean, if you look at it, you know, watches were everywhere, right? I mean, the gold watch, you know, was there, calculators. If you probably don't remember, I don't know if anybody remembers these, but this was one way to get data on the device. That at the right is the first version of the Google Glass, if you will. The person who worked on that, Micro Optical, founded in 1995, was the early developer. And he was hired by Google to do Google Glass. So we don't realize, but these things trickle through time. And then, of course, Jan 2013, the Pebble launch. Anybody here wearing a Pebble today? OK. So, you know, people love Pebbles, right? I mean, yeah, Apple Watch is here. People love Pebbles. Pebbles was one of the most successful Kickstarter campaign. I mean, they raised like amazing amount of money in a matter of, I think it was a day or so. And this time, they even surpassed that. They had another Kickstarter recently for the e-color version called the Pebble Time. And that one just, you know, just surpassed. Usually just the dollar just kept going up and up. So Pebble is a very popular device. Samsung Galaxy was launched in September. Moto 360 is a good device, you know, really the design and all that stuff. And then Apple announced Apple Watch in September. So all of that started to shake things up. And you often think, what am I looking for my wearable? So, you know, I'd say to each his own. When we used to have discussions about watches and device, they would say, you know what, most people stop wearing them in a year. Maybe true, maybe not be, we don't know. I mean, a lot of Fitbits owners stopped wearing them because they stopped wearing them, you know. But it's by desired function. So you don't know what you want to do, but when you know, you will get the device that makes sense for you, right? To each his own. All right. So now that I've given you a blurb of what happened, let's go back and look at the Pebble, right? So when Pebble came, and they had a version of this that said, "Breathe, Johnny, it's just a watch," you know, because Apple Watch came and you know, they were trying to play with Apple. I don't know where that's going, but successful Kickstarter campaign, and over 6,000 applications to date. Now you got to keep that in perspective, right? 6,000 applications to date, and Apple Watch is probably going to surpass that in a day. You know, I mean, I don't know if it already has gone to that extent, but there's a lot to choose from, right? Why such a popular platform? It's just the way it is. I mean, it is, remember to pick up some milk. I mean, you know, you can't go wrong with the display, right? You can see it day, you can see it in the night. You can see when the sun is shining. Here's when you're riding a bicycle. You know, it keeps track of the miles that you've covered. You know, that's how it looks, the steel. And they have a developer community. So, so I've been developing Pebble apps for some time now, ever since I got the watch. And I wrote an app for M3 because, you know, we attend conferences, right? I mean, we love conferences, we want to see sessions. And they have a decent amount of support. I mean, they have a lot of stuff built out. It's all in C. How many here shudder when you hear the name C? I mean, if you think about it, you have to deal with pointers, you have to deal with memory, you got to deal with all that. So the backbone of the Pebble is C. You can write stuff in JavaScript, but some functionality is limited. So can build native watch apps. iOS and Android SDK are available for building companion apps. And that's what I was working on when I was trying to do the app for this conference, with the Apple Watch, and some interesting stuff that I'll cover there. All right, so let's look at a demo. Okay, so there are two ways you can code against the Pebble. You can code by going online. They have an IDE called Cloud Pebble. We don't have Wi-Fi here, but you can also do it from a command line. So if you were to create a new Pebble app, it's really not that much to look at. Let me go here. Let's look at some of their examples first. Here's a watch face. You know, if you look at it, here, let me shrink this down a bit. Not much directory structure, right? There's some resource directories, there's some images, there's some fonts. Here's a source file. This is a C file. This is a JSON file that actually shows the watch. Actually shows the watch has the watch information. I don't know if that's clear at the back there. But this is, I opened it in Visual Code. I mean, it's just fun to run Visual Code on the Mac. As you can see, if you can see, there's a GUID at the top. There's some name information, and some settings that like you would typically expect. You know, so very small. Based on the nature of your app, you can write a tiny Pebble app, and it won't be hardly any size, you know, for you to push it out. Then they have this is the main file, right? So this is the C file. I'll open it up in Xcode just to take a look. All right, so if you hadn't seen C, this is C. Get all the nice little resources, all the bitmaps. So it can throw you off if you're used to C# and some of the modern languages, especially if you're used to Swift. That's if you've worked with Swift, but it's not too bad. You kind of get into the weeds sometimes, but it's not too bad. There's a so very simple. I mean, there's an entry point. There's a column. There's a window load function. There's some functions for what they're doing in the app. I know I'm scrolling a little fast here, but there's the window load function. You know, it creates a timer to display time. Go down. There's the unload. There's an init. It's typical stuff you would expect while developing, right? Get in, do some stuff, load the window, unload, get out, right? So writing Pebble apps is not a big deal. You know, you can write them, you can push them out. In fact, I've got several here that I can show you. Except, let's see if I can show you in the emulator here. Here's one. I mean, they just came out with an emulator. I mean, if you're used to the modern development environments, Pebble is going to seem very tough to work with, because the emulator simulator support is not that great. You know, you got to need the watch at some point or the other. But let's see if it starts the emulator. So it's loading. That's kind of what it looks like. It's trying to load the app. Animation timer. There you go. You know, something simple, right? Now, of course, this is launched in a color screen because that's the new color device. But that's how it looks like. So so not too difficult to write an app in Pebble, right? So let me go back and we'll keep moving along to the next one. So one of the things that happened is that when Apple Watch came out, people said, you know, is Pebble still going to be viable after a year? Pebble has had a successful campaign. They just had another successful campaign. But when you compare them to the might of Apple, you know, you think, okay, or Google or Android, where for that matter, you think, are they going to hang around, right? The end result is, how much do people want to pay for their watches? The biggest limiting factor right now from a smartwatch standpoint, and I think we are just so used to it, is the Pebble is not touchscreen. So if you have multi-layer, so you know, unfortunately, I can't quite show you here with the light. But the app that I wrote for the conference, that one, you know, you got time slots. So here's the Code Mesh app. You've got time slots, you got speakers, you got sessions, you think of any other typical app, it's going to get layered after a while, right? So touchscreen, you can navigate very quickly. If you don't have a touchscreen, you're going to struggle a bit, right? So I think that's one of the limiting factors of the Pebble right now, at least in my mind. The other thing is, how much do users want to pay? The Pebble is a waterproof watch. I can go swimming with it. You know, you drop it accidentally into something, you know, it's not going to go bad, right? Apple Watch is not waterproof. People have taken showers with it, but it's not supposed to be waterproof. So Pebble is going to be around, and I don't think we should, if you're programming smartwatches, if you're thinking about smartwatches, if you're thinking about wearables, we cannot ignore Pebble. Pebble is going to be around for a while because there's a lot of community behind it. So that being said, I got the Apple Watch, right? And the Pebble. Missing the Android and the Microsoft band, but they will come eventually, you know. But to each his own, right? I mean, I think it depends on what you're looking for in the watch. The Apple ecosystem for development is by far extremely easy. I mean, I found that out when I was trying to put the connectivity together between the two. It's very easy to do that. Pebble, you have to struggle a bit. So some of the key points here is that Apple Watch is because it's part of the Apple ecosystem, there's a bit of a limitation to it. But by the same token, the integration is just perfect. Touchscreen navigation opens up a completely different paradigm, as I'll show you. You know, we can see the emulator is not that great, but I can show you a little bit of that. If you want to if you want to play with the watch afterwards, just stop by. I'll be right outside, helping out at the booth outside today. So apps are more likely to be developed for Apple Watch than for the Pebble, because at the end of the day, the fact that people will want to buy your app is that much greater. Pebble still hasn't quite figured out, so all the apps on the Pebble are free. So if a developer has to put his time, you know, he's going to choose a platform that rewards, right? So I think that's going to be one of the factors there. So the other thing is to keep in mind, and these are some of the issues that have been reported in the current generation of the apps that are available. So if you got an Apple Watch and you download some of the apps, some of the complaints that have been raised is that people are not thinking of a tiny screen. You know, you've got a very tiny screen, about that big, right? So only display the data that's important. You know, don't try to cram the entire thing into that thing and then overwhelm the user. And you know, if you remember the VB, who here remembers the VB 6 days? 100 buttons on a screen, right? So don't do that. Won't get you anywhere. Ease of navigation is critical. Battery life is also an important consideration. I was just talking here recently. I mean, right now my Apple Watch sustains decent battery. Pebble, no issues. It'll last 4 days without dropping, you know, unless you're developing, then it drains pretty rapidly. But if you're just using it as a watch and getting data, it lasts 4 days, not the Apple Watch. The Apple Watch will drain within a day and a half at the most, based on your usage. So the thing we have to remember as developers, if you're targeting this segment, is that all apps that are designed for smartwatches, or all apps that are designed for iPhones or Androids do not need a companion app. And we get into this mindset of let's just create one because we can, right? We're not going to replace phones with watches. Not yet, anyway. So I said, let me try and do an experiment, and I'm going to write an app for Star Trek. You know, it's fun. Let's write an app. And what should the app do? So I set out creating some series of requirements. You know, first and foremost is that the iPhone app must exist independently. Not everybody's got a watch. Not everybody's going to want to watch. So the app has to exist independently. The other one is that each wearable platform has its own limitations. So important point to note. If you are dealing with the Apple Watch, Apple makes it a little bit easier for you to share data. But if you go to a third-party vendor like the Pebble, immediately you're going to get into a situation where they'll be like, you cannot have timers running in the background. I think that's a general rule. I don't think that's really specific to Pebble as such. But you cannot have timers running to sync data. Your app has to launch from the phone through an action and cannot just launch. Then you cannot drain battery, so you got to control the timing. So all those things come into play. So you got to think about what device you're targeting. Now I want to write for the Microsoft band. The SDK is out. I haven't got to play with it yet. There's probably going to be some of the same requirements there as well, right? The other thing is choice of watch face versus watch app for Pebble. So okay, so you have to see what app you're writing. If you're writing an app for a conference, people want to know time. I want to know what time it is. I want to know what my last session is, and then I want to know what my next session is. I'm not going to browse session data on the watch. I mean, it's too tiny a screen, right? So don't try to put session data on the watch and then, and make it hard. Now, of course, the Apple Watch scrolls and you can display it efficiently in the app, then it's okay. But as a watch face, you just want to see the time and you want to see. So that's something to think about. With the Apple Watch, you can't do that yet. But that's what I did for the Pebble, right? Only show tag sessions. So let you mark a session that is favorite, and I'm just going to show those sessions, right? So some of those considerations. Second thing is I mentioned about the mode of communication per hardware platform. It's easier to deal with Apple, between Apple integration as you would expect. The key thing to note here is that the Apple Watch app does not require, I mean, I say that with a caveat, but does not require your app to be running. And the reason it does not require that is if you turn on app groups and you share data, it can read data from the iPhone, from the stored data without having to wake up your app. So that's a very important consideration. I mean, I shut down the conference app and I was watching both the Pebble and the Apple Watch, and the Pebble could not do anything because it needed to get data, right? But the Apple Watch kept showing the next sessions and the next sessions. Each app situation is unique based, and one size does not fit all, and that's where the other mistake we make is that we make one design for all wearable devices. You cannot do that. Think about the Microsoft Band. It's only that small, right? You can't put 5 lines of text in there, right? So let's look at code. All right, so first and foremost, I'm just going to fire it up, and the app finally got approved. So if you want to download and take a look, I'm going to make this code available on GitHub. So you can, if you want to play with it, you can. So I'm just going to run it first. Scale 33%. Let's do that. So we let it run. Oh, it should run fine because I downloaded the sessions. I forgot there's no Wi-Fi here, but it should run fine. All right, so on the left, once again, I think it's hard to see at the back because it's kind of washed out. We've got, that's a glance. In Apple Watch terminology, that's a glance where you swipe up from the bottom and it shows you, at a glance, things going on like your heart rate, maps, your weather. That's a glance. That's just a few seconds of information. So it's showing the current session, it's showing the next session. If I tap on that, it opens up the actual app. And this is where you want to put the real, real stuff behind it, what you want to do with it. So it opens up the Apple Watch app. And as you can see, just information over here, showing the sessions, show to the next one. And I have a breakpoint there, take that out. So it's session information, right? So that's the display. That's the display that I chose. I said I'm just going to put the title and the abstract. And since you can scroll, no worries on the Apple Watch. Can't do that on the Pebble. You got only that much data you can fit in there, right? So a very simple app. Now if I open up the main app, as you can see, it's a very typical session app. Shows the sessions, shows the tracks. Can click on one, go to the details. Is it pretty murky in the back? I mean, it looks pretty washed out here. Let's see, can go to the sponsors and the speakers. And this is a settings screen. So very simple app, I put in a tutorial mode in the app saying that you want to try it on a day before the conference, which in this case didn't happen because it didn't release before the conference. But you could flip it on, and then any day is your conference day. You just set your session, and you will see the app respond accordingly. So very simple app, and the Pebble interaction is also managed in the same way. So what happens is that In the Apple Watch world, you launch the Pebble, you launch the conference app on your phone independently. It does not necessarily launch your Apple Watch app. Your Apple Watch is independent. In the Pebble world, what I've done is when you launch the conference app, it launches the Pebble app first, right? And that shows you the sessions. So there's different interactions there. From then on, the Apple Watch app is completely independent and it drives. So if I swipe up and I say, okay, here's my app, me tap on it, you know, or just look at it, it's going to get me session information, right? This is completely independent. No interaction here. The Pebble, on the other hand, is constantly pinging the iPhone saying, give me the next information, give me the next session, give me the next session. And I did that for a reason. The reason is that you cannot run timers. You cannot run timers for an extended period of time and put your app in the background. So these things we don't think about when you start looking at it. But there are certain battery considerations that you can run into that can probably change the way your app is designed, right? So what happens with the Pebble is that the Pebble will ping and we will get data every so often. Every 10 minutes in this case is what I wrote just to make battery life better. And it will show that session information. So it's interesting. When you start to program on these platforms and you start to think about wearables, you think about what's coming, you know, each platform is unique, right? The other thing is when you think about wearables, I had to go through what is called as a MFI certification. So Pebble is considered an accessory to the iPhone. And your app, if it talks from the Pebble to the iPhone, has to be whitelisted by Pebble. And that took another 4 or 5 days before Apple finally came around and said, okay, you know, this is done. And that holds your certification. So interesting things to deal with. You know, it's not just the fact of getting an app through the App Store. When you start to go down that path, certain things happen and certain, you know, you got to play with it. Like one of the things that happened is you see the simulator right here. So it's the classic example of why you need an actual device. So we'll see if it can get some data and run. On the simulator, well, the app launches so quickly. It's already there. I didn't realize that my app name was showing up as the first screen that Apple launched for me without telling me, you know. So it's just the way it is. So my app got rejected for that. So there's certain hidden things that you got to be aware of. But other than that, if I open up the interface for it, very straightforward. Let me pull it up. So here's the storyboard. I think this might be a little bit clearer in the back. Here's my glance. You know, as you can see, shows Star Trek, the date, now and next. At the top is the app. And I guess if you're used to the Apple, to the iOS programming world, this is a little different because you got two storyboards in one, sort of. You got the glance at the bottom and you got the app at the top, right? So two storyboards in one. Here's our segue. Nothing extraordinary, right? Here's my first screen. Here's the next screen. It has some labels that if I can get Xcode over, I can show you. Maybe much better. Or maybe not. I think the screen is just too big here. Let's open this up. All right, so you know, it's a simple label, right? And you can drag outlets from it just like you normally would, you know, and connect them. If I pull this over, I increase my presentation font. Let me do something. I'm going to turn down the presentation font. Make it much better. All right. It's a bit tough to show on the screen size. But, you know, if I go to the top, there's my outlet. So that's what you would do in a normal iOS app, right? Nothing different. So this becomes a very easy paradigm to work with. The other thing that I had to do to make the apps talk to each other is if I go here and I go to the capabilities, you can see that external accessory communication is turned on, and I've turned on app groups. So app groups is what allows you to share data, from one app to the other. So other than that, if you look at the main controllers in a regular app, very ordinary, right? So where's the magic happening, right? So let's look at the app delegate. Here's the way I'm communicating with the Pebble. When the app launches, by the way, the Pebble SDK and all is not in Swift. So this was completely written in Swift. The Pebble SDK is not in Swift. So you've got to bring the, if you look at the Pebble examples, you got to translate them to Swift code, and it's a little bit kludgy sometimes. So just something to be aware of. But I've imported the Pebble SDK, saying I'm delegate. Here's my watch ID, watch face ID, GUID. Start listening, and say if the watch is connected, go ahead and launch the app. Just API, right? So nothing extraordinary here. If I go down and I add a handler for receiving messages, this is the key part. This is where the interaction happens. So we add a handler for receiving messages and saying that, so when the watch app sends out a ping, it lands in this function, and then it updates the watch display, kind of reverse display there. If I go here, you will see just some logic. Go ahead and parse the session data, pull up the start, look at the start time, sort it by time slot, and then based on that, pull out the session names. And if you mark them as favorites, okay, then I look and see if you've tagged favorites there. So from an interaction perspective, if I look at from an interaction perspective, it's very simple, right? You've got different containers, you've got different projects based on your need. You can import the relevant SDKs that you need. If you're writing to Microsoft Band, I don't know if the SDK is available for by CocoaPods, but you can import that and you can write to it. So the key thing to remember is from a smartwatch display, Apple has a restriction that certain things can only take display for a certain amount of seconds. After that, they dismiss the screen. So you got to see my screen went blank, right? So that's the battery saving feature. So each platform, you got to figure out what is going on. Now, most of us probably will develop for the Apple Watch first, maybe the Android Gear as well, and the Pebble second, just because of the ecosystem, right? If you're doing that, I did this in Swift. You can do it in Xamarin. You can do it in any of the other cross-platform IDs. I believe Xamarin supports Apple Watch. You can do it. Telerik does not yet, but I think they're working on it. So the choice of the platform changes, right? The key thing is that with the smartwatches are coming. I mean, you've already heard of the Star Wars app that they're launching. Unlock the door for hotel room. I mean, it's take that one step to your house and you can do that, right? Open your garage door, quite possible. The Apple Watch right now can display your camera. So, if you have a camera in your house, you can conceivably write an app that lets you monitor your house from a remote location, right? If you can get a feed into it. So there's a lot of possibilities for writing apps for these platforms, as long as you consider the fact that the form factor is small. Right? So before I move on, any questions on the Pebble side or on the iOS side before I move on? Okay. All right. So let me go back to the app. And I'll just show you some of the stuff that is there. So you can see this is some of the entitlements that you have to add. From a platform perspective, writing in this is a bridging header. If you're not aware of this, if you're working in Objective-C using Objective-C libraries, you've got to create a bridging header to bring those over. So you might have to deal with that. And And then it's your usual data. Here's our Star Trek session data. I'm fetching it from the web, but that's how it looks like. You've got your time slots, you've got abstracts, bios. If you go to the top, it is broken up a little differently than what I'm used to, but it's just parsing data at the end of it. There's no real restriction, at least from what I'm aware of, in the amount of data you can display on the Apple Watch, at least not from what I'm aware of. So you can put everything you want in there if you wanted to, just not advisable, right? When you create a project, when you create a brand new project, the way you add an Apple Watch app to it is by selecting New Project and then going here. Since I already have the Apple Watch, it's not going to show. Yeah, I can show you a new project. But you can add an Apple Watch. Just select a single view tabbed application. You can add an Apple Watch app after you've created the project, right? So that's just something to be aware of, in this. So this created my basic project. If nothing, it doesn't do much, and you can add a new target for it. You can add a new target for it. So you can right click and say new target. New target, and you can add a WatchKit app to it. And that's how you add a WatchKit app. So just something to be aware of. If you go and look at the tutorials, I'm sure you're going to find hundreds of them on the web. One thing I found out was some of the icons restriction is different with the Apple Watch. They don't want you to include the alpha channel, which is the transparency. If you do that, they reject. But these are just minor things, mainly regarding each platform, right? The key thing is that the main issue comes in your launch time on the activities that you do. So for example, in the Apple Watch app, when you're launching it, here's my, there are several methods. There's one called will activate, and there's one called awake with context. So will activate is where you want to update your UI. You don't want to fetch data. So if you try to fetch data during that part, Apple will most likely reject your app for not launching on time. So few things to be aware of. Do it at other times. Use background threads. Let's see. So let me go back to the Pebble, so just you get a comparison for what's involved there, right? Pebble also has a companion app, which is just designed for the Pebble. If you were like some of the golf apps, for example, let me pull up one here. I think I had one open. So this is Pebble's golf demo. See if we can run it. iPhone 5. And this is, of course, return in Objective-C. I probably should. And we'll run it on the actual watch, actually, not on the. Wait for this to come up. Okay, so let's run it. We'll see it launch, and you can't see the Pebble screen, but okay. So you can see it's saying, okay, I can take app messages, I can receive and send app messages. This is you got to click on the phone. That's just the Pebble mechanism for transport. They use app messages and app sync. App sync is to keep the ongoing communication. But when I hit click launch over here, you're not going to see it. but oh, I can't click launch over there. I got to click launch over here. All right, so it brings up the Golf screen, and then if I want to send a data, I do that. It sends data to the Pebble Watch. So there are a lot of examples like these out there. This is for golf. There's one for a timer. There's one for weather. Fetching weather data and create a watch face for weather. That's out there where you can parse a JSON file. Pebble, you can write an app just for the Pebble. You don't need to write a companion app. If all your app is doing is using data from the phone and getting its internet connectivity and not really doesn't really need a companion app, you can completely exist in the Pebble world. Like there's a Starbucks app that lets you pay. We talk about Apple Pay, but there's a Starbucks app that lets you pay with a barcode. I'm sure if you've had enough Starbucks, you know that already because that's what you do normally, right? There's a Yelp app to check reviews. There's stock apps, there's a Runkeeper, there's a fitness one. The new Pebble that is coming up with a band that can let you swap battery or other sensors, heart rate sensors and stuff like that. So for the Pebble, they're just kind of exploring these territories. There are a lot of apps and a lot of potential out there. Color and all that is coming. You create your own accessory. They have a DIY kit on how to create your own band if you're so inclined. But at the end of the day, I think you will find that the touch becomes a big limiting factor. And for that reason, using programming for the Apple Watch, I think is definitely going to be one of the key areas just because of that. So let's take a look at the time. Okay, we got some time. All right, so if I go back and I look at, let's go back and look at some of these examples here. Okay, so what do wearables mean to people, right? I mean, definitely payment devices is something that probably nobody ever thought of. I mean, Starbucks app is okay. You can show the barcode, but actually using your credit card to pay is something new, right? Pretty useful, right? Flexible displays and all, we won't go there. But I mean, there's a lot of potential uses that based on the platform you can do. Like for example, this one has an NFC chip in it. Apple hasn't opened it yet, but you can use it to open your Office store, right? I mean, those things will come along, right? It doesn't have a built-in GPS chip, but it uses your phone, and as you saw from the demo, a lot of they recommend you take your phone anywhere with you, so you can leverage GPS updates from the phone. Things like if you're going for shopping, imagine if you're in Macy's and you're going shopping, and you have a Macy's app, and they want to give you specials based on where you're standing. They rather send it to your watch than to your phone, right? I mean, how many people walk around with phone like that? So there's a lot of usage scenarios like that out there, and I think we are going to start seeing them as some of the apps start coming out. There's one of the apps on the Apple Watch is a browser. I mean, you wouldn't think that anybody would write a browser app on an Apple Watch, especially given the size of the screen, but it uses Siri. It's called Cufflink, so if you want, just download and check it out. He's got some promo codes going there. A lot of scenarios that you can do, Think about this, right? It's a wearable, right? So wearables, I think, is just starting. People think of wearables, people think of smartwatches and all these things and saying that, oh, the next big thing is here. It is. But wearables means different things to different people, and you don't know what you're going to see. I mean, like the circuit bracelet, if it gets through patenting and if it gets into manufacturing, I think it's a pretty promising device. Project on your screen to use your hand and move around. Lots of different options, right? So what do we do as developers? What do we do as developers? Will Pebble be around? What are we doing? Do we program to Android Wear? I don't think there's any right answer. I think you got to do based on what the need is. Like for example, there are hundreds of apps being launched for the Apple Watch, the Kroger app, the Starbucks app, the Target app. All of them are coming out. Are people going to use them on the actual watch? Probably not. I mean, I don't think I'm going to go to Target and pull up a Target app and just to see what the app is doing, right? So they have to be based on function. If you're going biking and you want to see how you're doing, yes, you want to see how your heart rate or all that stuff is going, right? Heart rate monitoring, health. There are a lot of external devices that are coming in the market that are going to interface, and I think this is where the real smartwatch revolution is going to happen, because it's not by the device on your hand, but by the external things that you can do, like medical in the medical field and things like that. So a lot of different. So the perspective is that right now these are the options, right? But if you're trying to develop on something, unless you go out and write an app for both the platforms, you won't understand the limitations of the platform. We don't want to try with the mindset of just cloning what's there and going forward. You've got to think about what you actually want to achieve with it. So I'm going to leave you with this, and I will take questions. Say technology changes life. We all know that. The right technology can make it simple. So you've got to take your pick. So what will your wearable be? You got to think about that. So let's simplify life. Let's pick the wearables that we like and see where it leads us. Are there any questions on any of the platform or the programming? Okay, good question. I probably should have shown that. Oh, yeah. So the question was, how do you get the app from your computer to the Pebble Watch? It basically is listening through here. This will be easiest if I just show you. It's listening. It's a listener basically. So it's like sending data to an endpoint, and it pushes it onto the Pebble. Wait for this to come up. See, AirPlay can be tricky sometimes. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Okay, I'm having some trouble with the AirPlay. Let me pull up this while we are doing that. Okay, it's still so this is one of the earlier options that they had, where as long as you're on the same Wi-Fi network, it knows where your phone is listening. It searches for your phone. If you remember Xbox extenders, how we used to connect, anywhere in your house on your network, your Xbox and connect and talk. It's a similar concept. Unfortunately, AirPlay is not working well. I can show you. Is any other questions other than that? Let me see if I can get the reflector up and going here.
How many stores are there for the Pebble, and how many stores are there for the Apple Watch?
One store for the Pebble and one store for the Apple Watch.
So can you load third-party apps onto the Pebble, like from an unofficial store?
Yeah, you can push them to your Pebble in developer mode. So it's pretty wide open. It's almost like they don't restrict from that perspective. You can say, if you have the PBW file, it's just a zip file at the end of the day, you can push it to the Pebble. But I think the Pebble, so it was how should I say this? It was an unusual concept to bundle the app store for the watch within the watch app. Generally you would expect a separate website or somewhere to go to. And then I think Apple sort of followed suit, if you will, with that concept. So you open the Pebble app, and these are published apps, right? Okay, here we go. So let me show you. So there's the Pebble app. If I open it up, let me answer your question and then I'll come back. So you can see it's listening on a port. So I could actually push apps this way. So the watch, the phone pushes apps to the Pebble, and you deploy your app to the phone. It's kind of roundabout way. If you think about it, you can go directly to the Pebble. Does that answer your question? Okay. So here's if I go to the Pebble store, should be live. I think I've got 6 minutes, but we can see some things here. So, here are all the Pebble apps. You can see. Let me pull up the Apple Watch. The same concept. So if I go here, go to Explore, go to Featured, these are all the apps that are available. Same concept. So the Watch app loads both the apps. The App Store is within the Watch app. Any other question? Does that? Okay. Any other question? Yeah.
How long do you think it'll be till the watches are self-contained devices, so you don't have to pair up with another mobile device?
The HoloLens is intended to be that. The HoloLens, at least from what I've read and watched, does not need a computer to pair with. Now, how much of the battery life it will draw based on that, we don't know. But the HoloLens is already going that way. The Apple Watch, so one stark difference between the Pebble and the Apple Watch, my Pebble Watch is always on, incredible battery life. Apple Watch goes dark until I raise my hand. Now, if you're driving, you can't, it's a bit hard to do all the time, right? So I think they definitely have battery issues to work with. I mean, they could put solar bands to deal with the battery issue, create a solar band that charges the watch, then you don't have to worry, right? But until that happens, I don't think you will see that. The reason for pushing a lot of the functionality to the phone, like the drawing aspect and stuff like that, is to handle that battery need. It'll be interesting to see how Pebble approaches the e-paper display because they are releasing a color version of it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Any other question? Yeah.
Early reviews of the Apple Watch had that the third-party apps were rather slow. How much can the developers do versus how much of that is just a function of how Apple chose to offload the process into the phone and transfer it?
I think a lot of that is. I think it's how it was chosen to be done, because the session app that I wrote, I know it's hard to see. Tap on it, it seems pretty fast, right? But when you're first trying to load data, there's a blip. It shouldn't be for something that minor. I'm not doing anything, earth-shattering, right? I mean, just a simple data, right? So I think that is true. They take a while. Twitter takes a little bit of time to load. Anything else? All right. So if you want to see the Apple Watch, if you want to see the Pebble, and you want to see them working together, I'm right outside. I think we have 3 minutes left before the end of the session. So no more questions. Thank you. And stop by if you want to take a look at the watches.